Stop. Listen to that. That is not the sound of a protest. That is not the sound of civil unrest. That is the distinct rhythmic thud of a heavy machine gun tearing through a residential street in Tehran. For weeks, the headlines have been selling you a story about demonstrations. They've been showing you brave students waving signs and chanting slogans. But as of tonight, that narrative is dead. The gloves are off, the tear gas canisters have been replaced by high-caliber rounds, and the Islamic Republic has moved from crowd control to urban warfare. Welcome to the tipping point. Reports coming out of Tehran confirm that armed militias, not the police, not the regular army, but regime-loyalist paramilitaries, are conducting deadly night attacks. They are firing heavy weaponry into the streets. This isn't about dispersing a crowd anymore. It is about suppression through terror. And while the city burns, the external pressure cooker is screaming. Israel's UN ambassador has just issued a stark warning to the regime. In diplomatic speak, stark warning is usually code for "we know you're vulnerable and we are watching the clock." You see, most people look at this footage and see chaos. But if you look closer, you see desperation. A government confident in its power doesn't deploy heavy machine guns against its own capital city. You don't burn down the house if you think you're going to live in it next year. You only burn it down when you think you're about to be evicted. We are no longer watching a political movement. We are watching the kinetic dismantling of a theocracy in real time. But if you think the gunfire is the most dangerous thing happening in Iran right now, you aren't looking deep enough. The real threat to the regime isn't the noise on the street. It's the silence in the barracks. To understand why a regime turns to militias and machine guns, you have to look at one specific tragic data point that most of the Western media buried under the fold today. An Iranian soldier has been sentenced to death. His crime: he refused to fire on protesters. Let that sink in. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't a defector. He simply refused to pull the trigger on his own countrymen. And for that moment of humanity, the state decided he must die. Now you might view this as just another human rights atrocity in a long list of them, and you'd be right. But from a strategic perspective, which is where we live, this is a flashing red light on the dashboard of the Ayatollah's survival machine. Here is the cold, hard logic of dictatorship. A regime survives only as long as its monopoly on violence holds. That monopoly relies entirely on the chain of command. The general orders the colonel orders the captain, and the private pulls the trigger. When that private looks at the order and says, "No," the chain breaks. The sentencing of this soldier is a desperate attempt to weld that chain back together with fear. But it reveals a structural rot that no amount of execution squads can fix. The regular army, the sons and brothers of the people in the streets, is wavering. They are hesitating. And this explains the machine guns from Act 1. Why are armed militias roaming the streets instead of the regular army? Because the regime knows it can no longer trust the regulars. They have to outsource the violence to the fanatics, to the Basij, to the paid thugs, whose loyalty is bought, not earned. This is the exact pattern we saw in the final days of the Shah in '79. It's the same pattern we saw in the dissolution of the Soviet bloc. The moment the military splinters, the moment the enforcement class realizes they have more in common with the crowd than with the castle, the clock runs out. So we have a regime fracturing from the inside, firing wildly at its own citizens, while the regular military stands on the precipice of mutiny. It is a perfect storm of internal collapse. But nature abhors a vacuum, and geopolitics abhors a power vacuum even more. While Tehran is tearing itself apart, the architects of the global order aren't just watching. They are already planning the post-mortem. The West is bickering over islands in the Arctic, but the real power players are quietly arranging a new table. And you won't believe who the President of the United States just invited to pull up a chair. Is it a peace deal or is it a partition? Let's connect the invisible threads. So while the Iranian regime is busy sentencing its own soldiers to death to stop the bleeding, what is the rest of the world doing? What is the free world's response to a potential implosion of the Middle East's biggest theocracy? Well, if you open Twitter or turn on cable news, you'd think the biggest story on earth right now is a Danish lawmaker telling the President of the United States to, and I quote, "fuck off." We are witnessing a surreal split-screen reality. On one side, we have Western Europe and the US screaming at each other over the theoretical purchase of Greenland, a real estate dispute that feels like it was written by a satirist on a deadline. But on the other side, hidden behind the noise of that diplomatic spat, we have the signal, the actual news. Donald Trump has confirmed he has invited Vladimir Putin to join what he's calling the Board of Peace. Now I know what the reaction is. The pundits are clutching their pearls. How can you invite Putin? He's the bad guy. And sure, moralistically, they have a point. But we aren't here for morality plays. We are here for realpolitik. And if you stop reacting and start thinking, this invitation isn't madness, it's mechanics. Let's look at the board. The Middle East is currently a burning building. You have the Iranian regime wobbling Act 1. You have the Syrian government in a chaotic handover. We'll get to the ISIS jailbreak in a minute. The traditional security architecture is collapsing. In the old world, the world of 2005 or 2010, the United States would rush in. We'd send the carriers, we'd deploy the Marines, and we'd try to nation-build our way out of the mess. We would call our friends in NATO, and maybe Denmark or Germany would send a few support battalions. But that world is gone. The United States is suffering from terminal intervention fatigue. The American voter has zero appetite for another desert war. And frankly, the US military is pivoting to stare down China in the Pacific. They don't want to be the beat cop of the Middle East anymore. So if the building is burning and the fire chief America wants to go home, who do you call to hold the hose? You don't call Denmark. You don't call the Greenland Coalition. You call the only other guy on the block with the hardware, the will, and the ruthlessness to manage the sector. You call Russia. This Board of Peace isn't about friendship. It's not about Trump and Putin being buddies. It is a recognition of a new transactional reality. The president is essentially saying, if we are going to stop Iran from exploding into a regional supernova, or stop Syria from becoming a terrorist breeding ground, again, I need a partner who can actually pull triggers, not just draft sternly worded memos. Think about the timing. This invitation to Putin drops exactly as the Iranian regime starts using machine guns on its own capital. Coincidence? Please. In intelligence, there are no coincidences. There are only operations. The US realizes that if the Ayatollahs fall, a power vacuum opens up that is too big for one superpower to fill. This invitation is a preemptive attempt to partition the responsibility. It's the US saying to Russia, you take the North, I'll take the South, and let's make sure the nukes don't get loose. And this is where the phone off from Denmark becomes relevant. It's not just a funny headline. It is a symptom of the divorce. The old alliance, the Atlantic Bridge, was built on shared values. Democracy, human rights, polite diplomatic discourse. The new alliance, this Board of Peace, is being built on shared interests. Stability, counterterrorism, energy security. Europe is still playing the game of values. They are arguing about the morality of buying Greenland. The US and Russia are playing the game of interests. They are arguing about who controls the chessboard when the pieces start falling off. Here is the part everyone ignores. The Greenland dispute and the Putin invite are the same story. They are two sides of the great realignment. The US is signaling that it is done carrying the emotional baggage of the European project. If a Danish lawmaker wants to curse at the US president, fine. But don't expect the US to prioritize Danish concerns when Tehran goes dark. We are moving from a world of ideological blocks, democracy versus autocracy, to a world of transactional nodes. In this new world, you work with whoever can solve the problem in front of you. If the problem is an Iranian civil war, Putin is useful. A Danish MP is not. It's cold, it's cynical, and it flies in the face of 70 years of diplomatic tradition. But ask yourself this: if you are that Iranian soldier we talked about in Act 2, the one facing a firing squad, because the regime is terrified, who has the power to actually change your fate? The parliament in Brussels debating ice sheets, or the two men sitting at the board of peace deciding whether your government lives or dies? Power is shifting away from the talkers and toward the doers. And right now, the doers are gathering in a room, and they didn't invite the old guard. But here is the danger. When you shake up the global order, this fast cracks appear, and things crawl out of them. While Trump and Putin are setting the table and Europe is shouting at the waiter, someone left the back door open in Syria. And what just walked out should terrify you more than any diplomatic insult. Let's talk about the ripple effect. Because while the giants were talking, the monsters just broke out of their cage. While we were busy analyzing the chessboard of great powers, a pawn just knocked over the table. Reports from Syria confirm a massive jailbreak of ISIS fighters. This happened during a chaotic government handover, a polite diplomatic phrase that essentially means nobody was watching the door. Now you might be thinking, okay, a few bad guys got out. Why does this matter in the grand scheme of things? It matters because chaos is never contained. It is contagious. Connect the dots back to Act 1. The Iranian regime, the primary backer of the Syrian government, is currently fighting for its life in the streets of Tehran. When the head of the octopus is being strangled, the tentacles go limp. The security apparatus in Syria, which relies heavily on Iranian support and focus, is blinking out. And in that split second of darkness, the wolves moved. These aren't just petty criminals breaking out of a county jail. These are hardened insurgents, bomb makers, and ideologues who have been sitting in a pressure cooker waiting for exactly this moment. They are entering a region that is more fragile today than it has been in 10 years. This is the hidden cost of the great realignment we discussed in Act 3. While the US and Russia are negotiating the high-level architecture of the Board of Peace, and Europe is distracted by its own internal bickering, the ground level is being left unguarded. We are creating a perfect vacuum. On one side, you have the Iranian military fracturing. On the other, you have Western powers pulling back. In the middle, you have a security void. And history teaches us one undeniable lesson. Terrorism occupies the space that governance abandons. The Board of Peace might be a clever geopolitical play for the future, but right now today it is failing the present. The escape of these fighters isn't just a security breach. It is the first ripple of the new chaos. It is proof that while the giants argue over who owns the map, the people who want to burn it are already lighting matches. The irony is tragic. We are seemingly moving toward a deal between Trump and Putin to stabilize the region, but by the time they shake hands, there might not be any stability left to manage. So where does this leave us? If you step back and look at the whole board, the picture is clear, and it is terrifying. We have the Iranian theocracy, facing its terminal crisis, deploying machine guns against a population it has lost. We have the military chain of command, splintering with soldiers, choosing execution over obedience. We have the Western alliance fraying over trivialities like Greenland, while the US and Russia pivot toward a cold transactional partnership to manage the collapse. And we have the inevitable resurgence of terror groups slipping through the cracks of this transition. The world isn't ending, but the operating system is being rewritten. The old rules where the US policed the world and NATO held the line are being deleted. We are entering the era of the Board of Peace, a ruthless, pragmatic era where stability is valued over morality, and where dictators are invited to dinner if they can promise to keep the lid on the pot. Here is my forecast for the next 48 hours. Watch the Iranian regular army. Not the militias, the army. The sentencing of that soldier was a gamble. If it instills fear, the regime buys another month. But if it sparks a martyr complex, if one battalion, just one, turns its guns from the protesters to the militias, then the civil war begins in earnest by the weekend. And if that happens, don't expect the US to intervene with troops. Expect a phone call to Moscow. Now I want to hear from you. I'm looking at the comments right now. Here is the question I want you to answer. Is the Board of Peace a necessary evil? Is it better to have Trump and Putin divide up the responsibility and stabilize the Middle East, even if it means shaking hands with a dictator? Or is this a betrayal of everything the West stands for, leaving us vulnerable to being played by Russia? Are we buying peace, or are we just selling our soul? Let me know what you think. I read the smart ones.